from the Washington, D.C. area. It's the Inside Scoop, all the news that our viewers want to know. Now, here's the host.
Welcome to Inside Scoop. I'm your host this evening, Catherine Reed. My guests tonight are Mary Braxton from Prince William County and Kandy Hilliard from Stafford County. This is actually a follow-up show to a show we did last month on childcare issues in Virginia. This is something that may appear to be all of a sudden in the news, as it hasn't been before, but these women have been working on these issues literally for over 20 years. And this is not an all of a sudden issue. And so tonight we are really going to focus in on the issues of safety here in Virginia. And we are going to talk about the bills that are currently in play in our legislative session that have been introduced. Not all of them have made it. A lot of them are not what anybody wants. So we're going to touch a little bit on what drove this legislative process, and then we're going to talk about what is left of this legislative process here in this session. So thank you so much, Mary, Kandy, for joining me. I really appreciate you guys coming up here and having this very illuminating discussion with us.
Thank you for the opportunity.
So I want to start with this, the Joint Legislative Audit and Review Commission 1989 report. Now, Mary, you're the one who actually clued me in to the fact that back in 1989, a comprehensive study was done on childcare.
That's correct. 25 years ago.
25 years ago. So in 1988, a bill was passed in both the House and the Senate saying we must undertake a comprehensive study of childcare. Right. So I want to read to you some of what came out of that study because I think it's very important. It said about 3% of daycare providers caring for about 20% of all children in care are currently subject to state regulation. 3% of the 20% are regulated. That was back in 1989. It also found that more than 3/4 of parents favor state regulation. The parents want it. That's great. The study found that Virginia can improve its regulation of child daycare by 1, revising the current standards to focus on the health, safety, and well-being of children, which is what we will talk about tonight. 2, applying minimum standards to an expanded number of daycare providers, and 3, providing parents with information to help them locate and evaluate the appropriate type of daycare for their children. The draft report from this study is under consideration by the Commission as this report to the General Assembly goes to press. 1989. The Secretary of Health and Human Services and the Department of Social Services support the study recommendations. Whoever the Secretary was then supports the study recommendations. The Secretary is working with the Joint Subcommittee studying early childhood and daycare programs to develop a plan for implementing study recommendations. The massive research effort undertaken during this study provided for the first time a comprehensive picture of the daycare environment in Virginia. The final report should provide a much-needed factual basis for legislative decision-making on several pervasive and sensitive daycare issues. So we are left to ask ourselves, why did absolutely nothing happen? Nothing.
Right.
Right. In 25 years, we are basically still saying we need the threshold to be dropped down to 1. We need to lower the threshold. And that recommendation was made based on that report 25 years ago.
So this is not sudden, this is not new, no. but the problems not only have been exacerbated, but more widely probably reported, because suddenly the Washington Post is interested in the subject of the number of daycare deaths here in the Commonwealth of Virginia. So, Kandy, about how many bills were there? 22 when we started?
Yeah, there were a bunch. Well, and part of the reason why there's such a focus and why the Washington Post did the article was in just 2013, 9 children died. In the last 10 years, 54 children died. You know, it's very interesting looking at what the General Assembly focuses on. You know, there were some reports that I guess some Uber drivers were maybe not behaving well, and there might have been some assault or some bad behavior that occurred. The General Assembly fell over themselves to create laws to make the people in those cars safer. But 9 children died in 2014. And it's not safer for them. And the bills that are being proposed are not going to fix it. What does that tell us? What is the attitude about children in the Virginia General Assembly? I would say to you, that there's not a lot of value where children are concerned, at least. And I say that with the hopes that I am absolutely wrong, but the type of bills that have been passed and what we have done about this issue makes me think that I'm not incorrect.
Right, and the advocates, we all want, and I speak as I was once an unregulated provider. I'm a licensed family child care provider myself. I've been in the field for 24 years. And I've been on the Virginia Alliance of Family Child Care Associations board for 15 of those years. And I'm currently the president. So I'm speaking from several different viewpoints.
Right.
And there's the advocates, other organizations, Child Care Aware, VACI, Voices for Virginia's Children. We are all saying the same thing. The problem does not lie in family child care itself. It lies in unregulated care that's taking place in a home. And honestly, as a licensed provider and being a representative of the other regulated providers, I'm very offended to constantly see regulations and standards that we need to follow become more strict. But yet what happens is an unregulated provider is protected. And they're protected because nobody will address what the true problem is, which is the fact that we allow unregulated childcare. And in all honesty, legislators actually support it by the legislation that they pass. So it's not the advocates' efforts, it's the legislators.
And so in the last show, and maybe not all of our audience is up to speed by having watched our last show, we've got 95 counties and 40 independent cities in the Commonwealth of Virginia. It's a big state, and it covers a lot of territory. Fairfax County, Arlington County, and Alexandria are the only ones who have jurisdiction. Now, I've learned a few things since we last met, too. They have jurisdiction to require permits in those locales. Right. They don't call it licensing, and I have to give credit to Janet Reamer, who has informed me a lot about the Fairfax County. She's worked with Fairfax County for 20 years. She also happens to be David Bulova's mother-in-law. He did very well when he married. I can just tell you that right now, that David really scored big time. But Janet forwarded me information about how the Fairfax County, the Board of Supervisors had statements to make, their legislative representatives too, about that in some cases the suggested legislation is not as strict as theirs, and in other instances it's not as flexible as theirs. And so right. I'm left to wonder, because Fairfax County has had the Office for Children since 1975. Clearly their system works. Why these bills were drafted without, and I hear people talking about, well, the national average is fill in the blank. Why aren't we looking to Fairfax County as the pilot program for the entire rest of the Commonwealth? Any idea why that would not have been a go-to for people drafting?
Well, and I have no idea. Like I said, the advocates, we want it taken to one. We want what Fairfax County has.
Well, and a big part of that is it's expensive when you have to hire staff, and when you are required then to actually regulate and go out and inspect these homes. There are some processes in Virginia that potentially could be used for that purpose, though. Most of the rest of the state, you can become voluntarily registered if you don't meet that threshold of that 6th child, which means you're not actually licensed, but at least there are background checks in place. There's an opportunity to participate in the food program, and part of, so you and I have talked about maybe a market response to this issue. The USDA food program is a program that's available to people who do family child care. One of the things that happens with the USDA food program is they are in those homes 3 times a year to inspect. So even if we don't have the state willing to step up, there are other ways to address this issue if we go from it being voluntary registration to it becoming mandatory registration. So it feels like it's like you said, in Fairfax, we figured out how to make this work. Why are we not translating that into the rest of the localities? And again, money absolutely plays a role. But it becomes that issue of, what is a child's life worth? And I would say to you, it's worth more than what they're saying it's going to cost to implement licensing across the state. And I just think there are other ways that we can look at this. We need to open up this conversation so that it's not, this is the only way it can be done. What are the other ways that it's being done in other localities? How are other states handling this? We're not alone in this. We're not the only state dealing with child care.
And I think Fairfax too is very sensitive to the fact that because it's working well, they don't want this mixed bag of tricks imposed on them, because one of the things that is clearly an issue for Fairfax County is one of the bills requires a proficiency in English and evidence of education, like they're requiring a provider to have a high school diploma. Well, in a very multicultural county like Fairfax, there are immigrants who come here who decides who's proficient in English, and what sort of information do you bring from whatever country you came from, showing that you have the education necessary to take care of a child.
Well, and where that comes from actually the licensing regulations, that once a provider is licensed or to get licensed, they have to have those things. Fairfax, through their permitting process, they will permit 1 to 5 children can be in care, and you need to be permitted. If you have 1 child in care unrelated, you must be permitted to care for that child. That isn't a requirement by them. You don't have to speak English. You don't have to be proficient in English. But as a licensed provider, that is a requirement. So, and part of the proposed legislation as well, there's none of the bills at this time has language that's been developed that says that it won't impact the Fairfax or Arlington or Alexandria. So there are things that need to happen within the proposed legislation to include those things and include them to still maintain their ability to permit providers. But another issue with the proposed legislation is there are other issues that are being left completely unaddressed. And there needs to be language in this proposed legislation, whatever the final outcome is, that allows for a task work group that will address other barriers that licensed providers have, which is a whole other show. I've already developed the outline for that show for you.
Number 3.
And so there are other issues that need to be looked at, and there is, if we need to do this in a step-by-step process because of the expense of it, that's fine, but let's not take one step and change a couple things and then leave the rest unaddressed. And the only way that it could possibly or will really get addressed, go ahead and put the language in that there's a task force to work on it, look at these other steps so we can continue moving in a positive direction.
And I think that's really important. These bills affect real families and real children. And in the next segment coming up, we are going to talk with Elly Lafkin, who lost her daughter, Cami, in a very unfortunate daycare incident, and it prompted Cami's Law. And when we come back, we will talk with Elly, and you can fill us in a little bit on, you are the subject matter experts here, on exactly what Cami's Law is. So when we get back, we will be talking with Elly Lafkin about her daughter Cami and Cami's Law.
Osama bin Laden calls getting nuclear weapons a religious duty.
Today, materials that can be used to make nuclear weapons are stored in more than 40 countries.
Sometimes protected by just a chain link fence.
Yet not enough is being done to lock down these materials
before terrorists steal them.
Why did we learn all this?
My mother,
my son,
my sister-in-law
were all murdered September 11th.
Help protect America.
Together we can.
Please join us.
The stem cell issue is being debated throughout the country. Truth is, most everyone has an opinion, even if they don't know the facts.
Let's stop arguing and start really understanding the potential of stem cell research.
For us and for millions of Americans living with disabilities, get the facts.
Call 1-877-842-3442 for free information from the Stem Cell Research Foundation. That's 1-877-842-3442.
Following the tragic events of September 11th, there have been hundreds of violent attacks against innocent Americans.
Remember what that flag you're waving stands for.
Remember, please stop the hate.
We're stronger when we are united.
Remember what that flag you're waving stands for.
One nation under God.
Indivisible.
With liberty
and justice
for all.
In America, there's either room for everyone or it's not America.
Don't pick the wrong fight.
Let's keep America land of the free.
Stop the hate.
Planning a home renovation? Put this at the top of your to-do list. Because after 10 years, none of you are protected against tetanus and another potentially fatal disease, diphtheria. A minor injury, such as a cut or a scrape, can put you at risk for a tetanus infection. And while safety gear offers some protection, an up-to-date vaccination called the TD Booster is the best insurance against tetanus. So get the TD Booster. If it's been 10, do it again.
to the Inside Scoop. Here again, your host.
Welcome back. I'm your host, Catherine Reed. Our subject tonight is child care safety and regulations here in the Commonwealth of Virginia. My guests are Mary Braxton and Kandy Hilliard, and joining us via Skype tonight is Elly Lafkin. Elly is the parent of a child who was lost. She is not just a statistic. Cami is actually the reason we have Cami's Law. And I will let Kandy tell us a little bit about Cami's Law, and we'll hear from Elly about Elly's experience.
Elly has been a tremendous advocate and felt, I believe, Elly, we'll let you explain it, but felt like she ended up with a provider that she didn't actually really know who the person was, although she thought she did because she'd done all the things that in Virginia are required. She did the background checks, the Child Protective Services check, the state police check, but there is no requirement for an FBI fingerprint check. And why don't we let Elly tell us about kind of the experience of what happened and how we've come to have Cami's Law.
Thank you so much for joining us, Elly.
Absolutely, thank you guys so much. To tell you more about Cami's Law in Camden, my daughter, after Camden was born, my husband and I were both working full-time outside of the home. So we needed childcare. In the county that I live in, it's one of the more rural counties in Virginia. We have 2 licensed childcare homes and no facilities in my county. That leaves 24 slots for children in the entire county for licensed care. My husband and I ended up going 1 county over, and we ended up having to choose unlicensed care. The unlicensed family day home that we chose was recommended by 2 of my husband's coworkers who both had their children there at the time. So my husband and I did an interview, an in-person interview. We ran a name-based background check, and we decided to place our daughter there after the interview and the name-based background check. When we ran the background check, it came back with, the child care provider came back with 2 speeding tickets, and that was it. We thought, that's fine, everybody gets a speeding ticket, unfortunately. And we were confident in our decision at that point. I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, so you put your daughter with a daycare provider. You were a good parent. You did everything reasonable. You did a background check. You found 2 speeding tickets, but you had coworkers whose children were there. Mm-hmm. There was absolutely no reason for you to be alarmed by anything in this daycare home.
No, we thought we had done everything. We thought we had done our homework, and we had done our homework to the best of our knowledge for the education that's out there for parents. Unfortunately, after Camden died, the child care provider was arrested, and she was booked. And of course, upon booking, she was fingerprint checked. We later found out from law enforcement that she had 5 alias names, and she was currently on a felony probation at the current time of Camden's death under one of those alias names.
So this must have been a blow. I mean, obviously losing your child is a devastation that most of us will never know. But the circumstances under which you believed that she, in some way, was a bona fide, legitimate daycare business.
We absolutely did, as did my husband's coworkers who had had their children there for, one had been there for a year and one had been there for 2 years.
So in the aftermath of your daughter's death, what were you spurred to do? Tell us about your journey and about the journey to Cami's Law.
Well, absolutely. Well, we knew that we were not alone, first and foremost. We had, like I said, my husband had 2 coworkers that had been fooled by this name-based background check that sounds so wonderful and so formal. So we started pushing for fingerprint background checks for child care providers in Virginia. Had the fingerprint background check, Camden's child care provider, of course, Camden never would have been in her care. And she was not eligible for a child care license in the state of Virginia because of her criminal history.
And that's probably the scariest part about all of this, is that there's no way of knowing who these providers are, and people understand. They know what states have this lack of fingerprint background checks. And so in this instance, you can see that, this person who has aliases in other states and they pass these laws that say nobody can do childcare if they have certain things that they've done in their past, but if they're not licensed, who knows what they've got?
Right. So again, it goes directly back to we need to do something about the fact that we're one of 8 states that allows unregulated childcare to even take place.
Well, I'm so sorry for your loss, Elly. Thank you for joining us tonight. We appreciate you sharing your story, and we hope that there are people around the Commonwealth of Virginia who don't ever want to see this happen to another child.
Thank you so much. And I see that that's Joseph Allen, and he unfortunately, his life was lost as well in an unlicensed child care home in Midlothian, Virginia.
Right.
Thank you, Elly.
Thank you, Elly.
Thank you so much.
Elly mentioned Joseph, and Joseph died in October, and he was in a family child care home where the provider ended up with hot ashes in a plastic pail and in the garage, and it ended up catching the garage on fire. The firefighters get there and ask her, are all the children out? She had 7 children outside of the house at that time. And she said, yes, all of the children were out. Well, when the firefighters went back after the fire had been knocked down, one of their routines is to go back through that home. And they found a child in an upstairs bedroom strapped into a car seat. 40 minutes after that fire had started. The car seat was not his car seat. It was upside down. And so this baby died in a place, and this provider didn't even seem to know that he had been left in the house. So for the grandparents and the parents and every parent who's had to deal with this issue of finding out that the person that was caring for their child, for whatever reason, was not actually doing what they were supposed to. And quite often providers come into this with the idea of this is what I should do or this is what I'm going to do, but without a true understanding of what it means to have an evacuation plan, to think about making sure all of the fire alarms are actually working, making sure that there's been a thought process of how do I make sure that I can account for all of the kids? How do I make sure I can get in touch with the parents if something bad happens? If there's an earthquake, for example.
Well, and to go back to the unfortunate story of Joseph Allen, and I will say, and want to say, his grandparents and his parents, they wanted to do this.
To come tonight.
But they wanted to come tonight. But to have to endure, to retell the same story repeatedly over and over. They were down at General Assembly
along with
Thursday, along with Elly. And it's their child. This child just died in October. It's very new. So we're making sure that their story gets heard, and it needs to be heard. She had 8 children in care that day, or seven children in care that day. She was the only adult there. 6 of them were under the age of 2.
So let's just pause right there. So how many moms, because moms are supposed to be able to take care of kids, and I think she'd been a daycare provider for 20 years.
Right.
But how many people can reasonably take care of 6 children under 2 with additional mobile children?
Well, and when the incident happened, she said, I have 7. She didn't have 7.
She had 8.
The 8 was inside, strapped into an infant carrier, not just a regular car seat. It was not his car seat. He was the size of a 2-year-old. He was strapped into an infant car seat on the 2nd floor in a bedroom, in the master bedroom.
And I know that the firefighters kept asking her, were all the kids out, were all the kids, and she assured them that they were. But the fact of the matter is she didn't have a list. And there were 2 children who normally came who weren't there that day.
Right. Normally she had up to 10.
Up to 10. So 10 children, 6 of them are under the age of 2.
Right.
There were no working smoke detectors in the home.
Right.
So there was no fire escape plan.
Right.
The fire was started because she put hot ashes in her garage, which started the fire.
Right.
She had no list of who the children were.
She did not even contact the parents. The grandparents actually lived very close to her, and they're the emergency contact. She did not contact anybody.
Right.
And she couldn't even be found.
So the parents heard about this on the news.
Exactly.
All the parents of these children found out there had been a fire in a daycare home from the news, not from the daycare provider.
Not from the daycare provider.
So, and if we all can't, as human beings, relate to what that would feel like to see on television or hear on the radio, then I don't know that there's empathy in this world. Joseph, and I think we have a picture that we showed of Joseph, sweet child who had been in full-time daycare in that home for 10 months. So the fact that she thought all the children were out of the house, even without a written list.
Except for this full-time child that's been with you for 10 months.
For 10 months. How do you not know that you've got a child that's been coming to your home, there's Joseph there, for 10 months?
Right. And the really kind of heartbreaking thing as well is that this was not the first child this provider had lost in childcare. I think I'd heard about 16 years before, another child had died of causes undetermined. So the child was over a year old, the one that died. So they would have called it SIDS, but this child really was kind of outside of that window, typically of when they think of SIDS as happening.
Which is infants.
Yeah,
and of course, and the other thing that I don't think people realize too, as awful as these child deaths are in daycare, there is no penalty really for operating an unlicensed daycare.
No, in that same county, Chesterfield, there was a puppy found in somebody's yard or on their porch.
And I think we have that headline too of this. This is an amazing headline about somebody who's being tried as a felon. They're being charged as a felon. And this woman who had at times up to 10 children in care, which is twice the number of children you are allowed to legally care for in an unregulated child care setting that shouldn't be taking place in Virginia to start with. And the child was put the child didn't get into that infant carrier by himself
and strap himself in. He was put in there.
Right.
And when the fire broke out, he was left in that home, in that car seat that wasn't his, strapped in.
And I think
they're charged with the misdemeanor of operating an unregulated or an unlicensed child care. Now, had there only been 5 children in that home, then she would have been operating legally at the unregulated number that we allow. So then what would she have been charged with?
Not even a misdemeanor. Meanwhile,
it's sickening.
Meanwhile,
it's really sickening.
in the same county, Chesterfield County, a woman who is found to have puppies in a carrier, one of the puppies is dead. She is charged with a felony and is facing 7 years in prison for a dead puppy.
So we value a puppy and animals more than we value a baby and child and the child's parents.
And that is something we're going to talk about when we come back.
This is firstgov.gov, where we're obsessed with getting you government information.
Brand new student loan applications on the site, baby. This calls for a celebration. Where's your uncle?
So in the end, it was either take the astronaut gig or come work here. What can I say? Duty called.
Dude, that's my cop.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah. No, I'm pretty sure that's Sam's cop.
Oh, sorry?
Yeah. No. Sam's. No.
Just log on or email us and get what you need.
C, change of address form. That's how it's done. D, driver's license renewal.
E, emailing Social Security information.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Nice, we'll allow it. All right, Ed. What are those?
Government surplus cars for auction.
You posted those online last time.
No, you did.
I'm posting them online this time.
For all your government information, firstgov.gov.
Oh, what have we got here? Sometimes you feel tired. You can't seem to lose those extra pounds off your midsection. And your joints hurt when you take the stairs. Well, you're getting older. But I'm happy to say that there's some simple things we can do to keep you happy and healthy for years to come. We can also lower your risk for some serious diseases the older population is often subject to. Proper nutrition is more important than ever. Your body has changed, you know. Not as many treats. A basic exercise plan, lots of walks and fresh air, and most importantly, come and see me for twice-yearly checkups to help ensure the best possible quality of life. Now, how does that sound? Good boy.
Improve the quality of life for your elderly pet.
Schedule twice yearly checkups that include preventive care and regular lab work. A message from the veterinary members of the American Animal Hospital Association.
We're back to the Inside Scoop. Here again, your host.
But basically we just, hello, welcome back. It's Inside Scoop. I'm here with Mary Braxton and Kandy Hilliard, and we're talking about daycare, and we are pretty fired up. So we're going to get a little bit into the actual specifics of the legislative process. For those who are just maybe not remembering your 8th grade civics class, I'm going to break it down really simply for you. In the House, every delegate is allowed to submit up to 15 bills. I think that's a first this year that they cap the number of bills each delegate could actually submit. In the Senate, there's no limit on the bills that senators can submit. But in each chamber, they actually put the bills through committee hearings. And if they don't get out of committee hearings, then they don't go to the floor for a full vote. So some bills die before they ever see the light of day and actually get a vote. For the ones that actually get a vote and get passed, they go to crossover. And in Virginia, crossover starts tomorrow. We have a 45-day legislative session this year because it is an odd-numbered year. It's a short session. In even-numbered years, it's 60 days. So the legislature has put in a full day today. They have literally voted on probably hundreds of bills, getting ready for crossover. So we think that there were probably 22 original bills that started out. And understand that each of these bill sponsors create a bill on their own. They don't necessarily collaborate in the early day when they file their bills. That's what comes out of committee. And so they collaborate, they change the language, and so they try to craft a better bill.
Right.
So there's a lot of confusion. I think you all will agree. I think not just the legislators are not familiar, even though 25 years ago they did a comprehensive study. A lot of those, to their credit, there's not a lot of people there from 25 years ago. In fact, probably not one. I think Lacey Putnam.
No, there are.
Oh, they're still from 25 years ago. Oh, Bill
there.
Howell's there from 25 years ago. So there are people there from 25
Bobby
years
Orrick.
ago. We should ask those people, like, why didn't you do anything? That would be a good question to ask Speaker Howell. Like, why didn't you do anything 25 years ago? So what we're dealing with now is some bills that are kind of hobbling toward crossover, and we don't know at this juncture whether they will cross over to the Senate.
And it's interesting, and it's very important for people to understand when you read in the papers or a Facebook post or Twitter, when you hear on the news this bill passed, at this stage of the game, it doesn't mean it passed and it's law. It only means it passed that
interim step,
that little step to move on to the next step. But each one of these steps, the bill how it starts out, the wording can change. Anything can change from the beginning of proposed legislation. This is what we propose to this is what is now passed and crossing over at the point of crossover, which is tomorrow.
Yeah.
But there were 22 bills regarding childcare, and a lot of those were kind of rolled into one comprehensive bill. And then as it goes through the process, it's changed language and so forth.
So is it kind of the Frankenstein bill, or how did that work out?
It's almost worse. It's kind of like they say, it's like making sausage. Sometimes it's better not to really quite see how it ends up being law. And quite often what we propose or what gets proposed is completely changed. And because of that, I know that with the Senate bills, there were a number of bills proposed. And what it looks like is coming through now is one which counts kids. And the negative of that is that it impacts people who are licensed, really does not address the issue of unregulated providers. The background bills, which is the fingerprint bill, which it does look like, I guess I would say that if nothing that I would consider more positive comes through, having that fingerprint bill actually be passed into law is a really good thing.
The one that passed is the fingerprint bill. It looks like it's only going to be for licensed family child care providers. And I don't know what I'm hoping, and this is where that language of, there needs to be language of a task work group to address what the next step is going to be.
Right.
It may be that they're implementing it step by step for the financial reasons of money that it's going to cost to run it, which makes sense, but make sure you get that language in there of having a work task force to make sure that the process is already started for next year. Otherwise, it's going to be the advocates all starting all over again. or a legislative.
So the bill that
started.
has the fingerprinting in it, does it have other language in it? And what is it better to have? An imperfect bill with part of what you want?
That's usually where you end up. But there are times when it feels like what ends up being passed is detrimental compared to what you had hoped. This idea, one of the things, and I think Mary will talk about that when she starts talking about the House bills, they're talking about changing the threshold basically from 6 to 5. You're still not addressing the fact that children are dying in unregulated childcare. We need to address that specific fact.
Is there any bill, and maybe because I've read a lot, that says there should be disclosure or mandate that unlicensed providers disclose that they're unlicensed?
There is, and that has passed the stages it's needed to pass, and it will be part of the crossover tomorrow. The problem with that bill, the intentions of it may be a very good first step, because we could possibly then get an idea of how many are out there, but there's no penalty for not saying I am operating unregulated.
So what is the motivation to disclose if there's no penalty for not disclosing?
We're saying you need to contact Department of Social Services and let them know that you're operating unregulated, but there's no penalty if you don't do that.
Well, and how do they even find out that's what they have to do? I mean,
Right,
if they're
like,
unregulated and they're
so
carrying,
what is the communication channel?
There's not. I mean, and that's part of the frustration as advocates. This bill, maybe while it might be well-intentioned, it does not accomplish what they hope to accomplish.
Right.
When you don't have a requirement there, people just aren't going to do
There's
it.
no way to enforce it, and because there's no way to enforce it, there's no penalty that goes along with it. You do need to if you're operating unregulated, according to this bill at the stage it is right now, you do need to let your parents know that you're unregulated and direct them, and which is fantastic because the parents should know that. But is every parent going to really understand what that means?
Yeah.
And that's where, that's going to be live number 4, because I have an outline for 3 and I have an outline for 4 for us. There needs to be a lot of public awareness.
Oh, I agree with you.
And we need to really get that information out there for the parents. Parents are busy, they're trying to work, they're trying to maintain their home. They don't have time to fully absorb what all of these things mean.
And I think there's a presumption too that daycare businesses must be licensed. There must be somebody.
Right.
It's a business. You're paying a lot of money. I can tell you that when my 3 kids were in daycare, it was the biggest expense we had besides our mortgage payment in the 1980s.
And that is still the way it is.
biggest expense behind our mortgage. It's a business.
It's even more typically than what it costs to send a child to college, especially in this Northern Virginia area. It costs more to have a child in full-time childcare than it does to send them to college.
Well, a lot of people will say, well, unregulated care is less expensive. That's why people do it. That's why people do it.
Well, it's a market-driven issue.
I operated as an unregulated provider for several years, and I will tell you, I charged what the centers charge.
Sure.
I did not charge less.
Right.
It is market-driven.
Right. It is
and so
absolutely
parents, I
market-driven.
think parents are operating under a false set of assumptions.
Right.
And, it's one of those things where if you're one of the lucky ones where nothing happens to your kids, then what's the incentive or motivation for you to care about somebody else's kids that are in daycare?
Well, and that was part of Lexi's law that took place in Kansas. They allowed for up to 5 as well. At one time, they changed it. They now do not. You had to let them do notification if you were operating up to 5, and they allowed unregulated childcare for up to 5. They did a huge campaign. The law was now won. And the other part of that is there were sponsors, organizations, businesses that sponsored to do a massive public awareness campaign.
Right.
And that's what we need. We need to do that same type of thing here in Virginia. Similar to the Back to Sleep campaign that took place several years ago, where you saw buses, metro buses, driving down the street with Back to Sleep and Safe Sleep and what that was. And it brought about public awareness across the state. We need that same type of public awareness campaign to take place. But again, they did it in Kansas through Lexi's law, and they did it from organizations and businesses donating money to help do that type of campaign, because it's going to cost a lot of money to do something like that, but it has to happen.
And actually, David Bulova was pleased that his House bill requiring hospitals to give information to new parents when they leave the hospital about how to appropriately put their child down to sleep and what appropriate bedding should be in a crib and not. And so, and that is a huge stride, but it is very much related and tied to the fact that now you've got new parents who know the appropriate way to put their child down and what is appropriate bedding, but not necessarily daycare providers.
And the information is out there, I mean, as far as how to seek quality child care and what is care, but those parents don't know to go look at the Department of Social Services website. They don't know to go and look at child care, Virginia Child Care Aware. There needs to be something to help these parents know that that information is out there for them.
So let me ask you this. So we're going to, because when we come in our last segment, we're going to talk about budgetary issues and the price tag that people keep wanting, because everything's got a price tag, and this is what I'm hearing it already. Oh, regulation means more expensive. I think they're two separate issues. Affordable daycare is a separate issue from safe daycare. But we get that pushback, we're going to get that pushback. But should the state be allocating money for awareness? And you know, and is that an easier ask as we go through this process? And let's just make the assumption right now, this is a multi-year process.
Yes. This is. And Delegate Anderson has been, from Prince William County, he's been fantastic. He does have some proposed legislation, and he has stated many times, this isn't a quick fix. We need to address it this year, and we need to put a work group in place and do something to make sure that path gets followed next year and then the following year. And that's basically what we need to do. We need to take a step back and ask ourselves, and the legislators need to do this. The advocates have already done this. But the legislators need to take a step back and say, if we were to start at zero, at scratch, bottom, what would we want child care in Virginia to look like? What would we want it? How would we want it to be? And make sure you're passing legislation to move it in that direction.
You know, it's like there's a bigger picture piece of this that is missing as well. When children are in quality child care settings, they come to school ready to learn. There's a dramatic cost savings in having children arrive at school understanding how to take turns, understanding how to be beside somebody, how to know how to act in a group. There's huge savings in that, and having children already beginning that process of learning how to read, and you learn how to read by, by having things that are associated, like if it's a cup, that there's a picture as well as the letters. You know, there's some real basic things that we can do. Not only that, but when we have intentional providers, we have providers who understand how important it is to talk to children regularly.
And I think that's important. So when we come back in our last segment, we've got a lot to cover, and I agree with Mary. I think this is going to require multiple shows, so I hope everybody stays with us as we work our way through the many aspects of child care here in Virginia. So please join us for our last segment. We'll be back shortly. Thank you.
Around the world, 1 out of every 3 women will be beaten or otherwise abused in their lifetime, often by a family member or loved one. A future free from violence. It's all she's ever wished for.
Did you know you have the power to stop children from joining gangs? You can help a father find a job and home for his family. You can assist a woman who can't afford the medicine she needs to live and the home she can't live without. You can choose to make a difference in our community. Support Volunteers of America, and you can help improve the lives of nearly 2 million Americans each year, with programs and services that help individuals and families overcome their challenges to become as independent as possible. Support the programs that are working in our community. Contact Volunteers of America today. Call 1-800-899-0089.
For some folks, saving for the future is easy, but for you, it might take a little more effort.
Saving for your future is your responsibility, and there's a lot to save for.
I never thought of that.
Like your child's education, perhaps uncovered medical expenses, or just to be sure you can live the way you want when you retire. The time is now to save for tomorrow. Save now or work forever. The choice is yours. Choose to save.
We're back to the Inside Scoop. Here again, your host.
Welcome back. I'm your host, Catherine Reed. I'm here with Mary Braxton and Kandy Hilliard. This is the last segment of this particular show on childcare issues, and we are going to the best of our ability, try to fill in the blanks for you and help you understand what you can do to move this along. So let's start talking about the task force, since we kind of left off with that. Who would be on this task force if they put one together?
Well, right now, Ralph Northam, who is the Lieutenant Governor, of course, has, I want to say, Commission on Childcare or whatever I'm sorry, I don't have the exact language. But there is a group of people who are meeting, and I believe that will be one of the places that addresses this that's really kind of outside of the legislature. They've already begun that process, and they will be talking about what should childcare look like in Virginia. It's interesting to see sort of what the connection is with the federal programs and what the drivers are for changing some of the ways we do things in Virginia. I know that one of the proposals this year is that people who are providing subsidy care, so children who are receiving subsidies, there's a proposal that they be licensed, and I believe that the driver of that is the federal regulations. And the idea, one of the things we often hear from the Virginia General Assembly is, well, those grandmas shouldn't be, we shouldn't be asking them to be regulated. Well, the reality is many of the family members who are doing that subsidized care are grandmothers or are aunts or uncles or whoever it is. They are being required to get the background checks. They are required to get 4 hours of education. They're required to have CPR. So it's not like we're asking for something that's unreasonable. Anything that we do that discourages people from becoming regulated by, for example, making regulations harder for those who are already regulated while ignoring those where we have the problem, where the 9 children have died in unregulated childcare this year. Anything we do that discourages people from moving toward regulation means that there's less of a pool of providers, quality care to, for parents to choose from.
So I go back to the study done in 1989 where it said only 3% of the 20% were actually regulated.
Right.
That's a tiny number.
It is tiny.
So compared with the rest of the United States, how do you think we're doing, Mary?
Well, again, we're one of 8 states that allows unregulated childcare. One of 8 states. And of those 8 states, the average is a threshold of 3. They want to, say, okay, well, we're going to move it instead of needing to be licensed at 6. Now we need to do something, and we need to do something quick, and we need to fix this problem. So we're going to require them to be licensed at 5.
Right.
They moved it down 1. That's not even the average of those 8 states. And we're one of 8 states that allows it in the first place. The background checks, 33 states require fingerprint background checks. 33.
That's the majority, if I count right.
The ones that touch Virginia and Washington, D.C., they have fingerprint background checks. So we have the fingerprint background checks if you are a licensed provider. You can care for up to 4 children. At the 5th child, you must be licensed. You must be or permitted or voluntarily registered. You must be regulated in some way. If we have that threshold at that number, I guarantee you the ones that would be caught with a fingerprint background check and not able to operate regulated, they're going to say, that's not a problem. I'll just keep 4 kids. And they they stay unregulated, or they drop from being a regulated provider into that unregulated field. And you know what? They're not going to keep 4 kids. They're going to keep 8 kids. They're going to keep 10 kids. So what have we really done? Have we moved forward? Are we moving forward? And again, to make sure we move forward, we've got to have this task force and this work group.
So let's go back to Joseph Allen. So how is it possible that this woman was keeping 10 children? And I mean, and did the parents who were using her as a daycare provider even know she was keeping 10 children?
You know, one of the things at the General Assembly, there was when we were originally talking about different pieces of legislation, there was this push by some legislators to say, well, that parents have to count. Well, when you come in, if you have one of the first children in, then there is only one other child there or two other children there.
And that was the case with
so you
Joseph.
count
He was the
it.
first one.
The other thing is that if this parent knows, if this provider knows that when this is what time parents come pick up, and people have pretty regular schedules usually, then at that time she would only have 3 or 4, however many she was supposed to, because apparently it wasn't unusual for her to put a child in another room. So people who are not following the rules, and when there's not really a way to catch them because they're not required to be regulated in some fashion, they're going to know how to move it around. And so it's not appropriate to expect parents to be the ones that count.
But that's the case also with Elly. And what has inspired the Cami's law on these fingerprint background checks. And she started this process for the fingerprint background checks actually started last year. And there was legislation on it last year, and they moved it to a work task force and a work group to study how it could be done.
What the cost would be.
And what the cost would be. And then it came back to legislation this year. And that needs to be the exact same thing that happens with all of these things. But another thing to mention is the fact that provider also, as a provider, you know when parents are coming. You know. But as everything unfolded after that poor child's death, there was also drugs involved.
Right.
So,
right. I think I remember
those
seeing
things
that.
and paraphernalia for distributing drugs and making the drugs, and all of that was found in the home as well. So not only does she find out that she has 5 alias names,
right,
but she finds this out as a mother also. And I think that every legislator needs to take their feet out of the shoes that they wear every day and put their feet in these parents' shoes and put their feet in the regulated providers' shoes and realize, you know what? Exactly what we're doing is we not only encourage unregulated care, we support unregulated care. And that's the path that Virginia has been on, and it's time to stop. 25 years and nothing's been done, and it
seems like what we're trying to do is regulate the regulated people,
and that's
which is a tiny majority. They're a tiny group,
and that's what continues to happen. So there was discussion about requiring that providers count their own children, and it's so easy to get lost in the minutia of this. But the reality is, the people who are unregulated are not counting their children at all, and a lot of times are caring for many more than what they would otherwise be able to care for. But then you put more regulations on the people who are already licensed. And what that does is it discourages people from continuing and staying regulated.
Now let me say, the advocates, we all fully support an unregulated provider needing to count their own children in that number, in that threshold number. But what isn't going to work is to have the providers who are regulated having to count their own children. That's going to be another slap to those providers that are regulated, because
we're doing what they're supposed to do.
The regulated providers already, their children are accounted for. Once you're a regulated provider, you have to count your children and include them in the ratios and staffing guidelines that you need to maintain that are within the standards. Every provider, unregulated provider, may have the best intentions, but there's no guidelines for them. And without being regulated, there are no guidelines. So we're not asking anybody to reinvent the wheel. We're asking you to realize we have a vehicle of 2015 with a wooden wheel on it from 25 years ago you realize it's not going around anymore. We need to do something.
So in the last few minutes, let's talk about what, instead of being discouraged, which it's easy, obviously, to be discouraged by a lot of this, is what can people do to move forward? I mean, what are next steps? How do people get involved? How do we create awareness? How do people find the task force to send information if they've got information?
There are several organizations that have been allies throughout this, working very hard to bring information to the General Assembly. They've been working very hard to craft legislation, some of the proposed legislation that's been put forward. Voices for Virginia's Children is one of the groups. The Childcare Aware of Virginia is another group, and the Virginia Alliance of Family Child Care Associations, along with the Virginia
Association for the Education of Young Children,
which is we call VACE. And all of these organizations, I would think we could put something maybe on your website that will allow folks to get in touch. And there are links to some of the task forces. Again, the Lieutenant Governor's office has a commission, either a commission or a task force that's working right now on this process. And it's gonna have to be one of those things where we continue to keep the focus on this issue, because what happens is a lot of times I think the legislators believe if they just sort of push us far enough off, then we'll get tired of this and back off. It's been 25 years. A lot of us have been still involved in this. Folks were down at the General Assembly and one of the legislators says, I see many of you, you're the same people that were here 25 years ago. And it's like, well, so then that ought to tell you something. Fix this. And his attitude was, y'all are just agitating. Well, yeah, because children are dying in childcare.
Right. And there are several, like I said, like Kandy said, several organizations, and we could put the link on your site. It's vaec.org. Okay. Childcare Aware of Virginia, Voices for Virginia's Kids. The Virginia Alliance of Family Child Care Associations is a fantastic organization and website to go to for the providers that want to get more involved. There's local associations in your area you can join. You can learn about membership. You can learn, and then we have the links on our website that could link you to the others as well. And they have the call to action. Yeah. Where you can just send information
I would love to see, and there probably are conferences that are held in the state for chapters to be founded of some of these organizations in places where, in Rockingham County, maybe they don't have some of these support systems or associations or affiliations. Lack of awareness, lack of someone to lead the effort. And so how can we resolve that issue so that all across those 95 counties and those 40 independent cities, you've got the same quality
of
child care?
We need to find something in place across the state.
Childcare Aware Virginia has divided the state into 5 regions, and there are child care resource and referral agencies in all of the local communities that can help parents find child care. They can share information about what child care providers should, or what child care parents should be looking for, the kind of questions they should be asking, where they can find additional information about reports on licensed providers. All of that kind of information is out there. So,
and there's also the Virginia Department of Social Services
where they actually have the actual receipts.
In Fairfax, you have Office for Children, which that's a fantastic resource as well. So the resources are out there. It's just a matter of we've got, again, it comes down to public awareness, which, there needs to be a very big campaign to try and get as much information as possible out to the parents.
Well, I want to thank you both. Thank you, Kandy. Thank you, Mary. And it's game on for the next episode of our child care journey in Virginia. So thank you very much. We appreciate the information. Thank you for tuning in tonight, and we'll see you